I remember meeting with some faculty from a business school. I asked them, what do you want to be known for with this program? What's unique about it? They really could not answer the question. Their first response was, the accrediting body dictates the curriculum. We have to have so many credits in this and so many credits in that, and that pretty much drives the curriculum. That's an example of commoditization, right?
Hello, and welcome to the Future of Universities podcast series. My name is Sarah Jabher, Manager Business Development at UIIN, and your host for today. In this week's episode, we invited Melora Sundt, Chief Academic Officer for Noodle Partners, to discuss the challenges of higher education, the balance between quality and affordability, and the concept of agile campuses. Join us and gain valuable insights on shaping the future of universities and delivering exceptional learning experiences in the digital age. We hope you enjoyed this discussion. I'd really like to start maybe by hearing a bit more about Noodle Partners and your role there. I think it's an interesting concept and probably not very familiar to many of our listeners.
Noodle is a tech-enabled service company that helps universities move strategically into the future. It began by helping them move programs online, degree programs. But universities' needs have expanded beyond that. And it's not just about for-credit programs. They're also looking at executive education and stackable certificate. And that leads us into what employers need. So helping universities connect with employers and work out their strategic plans. But we do everything in the areas of marketing and enrollment to attract new students, learning design, helping them take their programs and reconceptualize them for more engaging learning, whether that's on ground or online, the technology integration that goes along with that, the placement activities that go along with field-based programs. It's just the whole array of services that you might need to support the learning experience within a university. And I came to this from having been a professor and an administrator in higher ed, and actually working with our CEO, John Katzman, when he first started one of the earliest online program management companies. And my feeling at the time was, this is a terrible idea, because my only exposure to online was that it was boring and flat and just horrible, completely contrary to the learning experience that we wanted our students to have. And his response to me was, you haven't kept up with what's happening in the technology world. And he was right. And I found the experience of transforming my own courses so creative, the chance to rethink time and space, to have this kind of rejuvenation of the sense of creativity and working with teaching and learning in a very different way. I learned an awful lot and thought, wow, this has been so transformative for me, for my students. I would love for this to be an experience that other faculty have. And I learned a lot by watching the way that company was interacting with our faculty, how much they did not know at the time about how universities work, what faculty priorities are. And now that I'm at Noodle, it's a personal mission, and it's certainly the ethos of the company to truly understand their university partners. And that's where the issue of academic freedom came up.
Really interesting. You use the term rejuvenation. I think that's a great term to talk about learning and how to create different types of programs and really create that student engagement. I'd love to touch on that a little bit more. Maybe for those listening who aren't aware, Melora was invited as one of the contributors for our initiative, the Future of Universities Thought Book, where she wrote a really thought-provoking piece called A Tale of Two Values. And it explores different considerations for the future of universities, including how they can stay true to their values while still generating enough revenue to sustain and thrive. In your article, you also talk about some of the threats or challenges that higher education institutions are facing. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I think that one of the biggest challenges is the commoditization that seems to be happening among students, the way they think about getting a degree, that for many of them, it is a checkbox. It is a credential, a certification that gives them entree into a career path. To a certain extent, from their point of view, it doesn't really matter where that degree comes from. So if it doesn't really matter, I just need the degree, then I'm going to go for the least expensive path. That makes it difficult for institutions to compete unless you are at an institution that has tremendous brand recognition, a name that everybody knows. It's hard to explain why a student should spend a certain amount of money to come to your institution when they start just looking at the bottom line. So I think that commoditization is making it really difficult for institutions. One of the things that I learned as I was putting our own programs online is having a sense of identity as a school, as an institution, as a program can really make a difference in the way you shape that program, that it's not just a collection of courses. You're really thinking about what the end game is. What do you want your students to be known for? If 2 years from now, employers are coming and grabbing up all of your students because they are the best out there, what is that? What is it that your students know and are able to do? And then how do you teach that? How do you infuse that through the program? And so it's faculty having conversations, thinking about their strengths. What are they good at? What do they love? What are they passionate about? How does that get infused into the program? What differentiates this program? An example of this at the institutional level would be Morehouse College. Morehouse College, if you were to Google it in the US, has this notion of the Morehouse Man. It's a historically Black college university for men. And they make it a point to talk about what their graduates will be known for. And that drives through everything they do. Yeah. And I just love that idea. It's so powerful. Another would be a program that we've worked with, which is Tulane University down in New Orleans, Louisiana, has a master's in social work program that focuses on resilience, disaster recovery, resilience, which is unique, right? Not all master's in social work programs focus on that. And they use that to inform everything about the curriculum. So I think those are some ways that we're not all the same. It's not walking into a grocery store and trying to buy non-fat milk and you get this feeling all milk is the same, so just look for the price on the carton. No, they start differentiating. Some of it's organic and some of it is local, and right, all these different ways. And I think higher education has to think that way too.
So building on that a little bit, in your article, you also talk about inverting that commoditization game. I'm just wondering, what are some ways that you might have around what can universities be doing? Like, how do you balance this delivering quality and delivering value while still not inflating prices and not having to charge exorbitant fees for their programs?
It's challenging. It's expensive to run a university, especially if you're one that's not getting any kind of government funding. And so thinking about what kind of quality experience can you bring to students, and you don't have to be everything to everybody, but you have to do something really well. And so what is that something that you want to do, that you want to be known for? I remember meeting with some faculty from a business school. I asked them that question about, what do you want to be known for with this program? What's unique about it? What makes you passionate about it? And they really could not answer the question. Their first response was, the accrediting body dictates the curriculum. We have to have so many credits in this and so many credits in that, and that pretty much drives the curriculum. That's an example of commoditization, right? So their program is going to look like every other program that also has to meet the same credentialing requirements.
Yeah.
So I would encourage them then to think the next step. Yeah. What regionally? The answer can be found. It's a challenging conversation, but it's not impossible. There may be regional needs, like Tulane, for example, with hurricanes and disaster relief and all of that, that makes sense for the program to address. Or there may be a body of research among the faculty that makes sense to help shape the program, or a particular student population. There are programs that have structured their curriculum to be responsive to members in the military in the US, for example, who are deployed frequently, right? Whatever it is, it's figuring that out and doing that well. And that's how I would invert it.
Yeah, that's great. When we work with universities, we always talk about not trying to replicate what another institution does, really identifying what are your strengths, what are the needs that you talked about, regional needs. I think that's very important. But I also think maybe one of the challenges, and I don't know if that's what you have also noticed, for example, is the rankings. Many universities try to be in the top 100 or whatever it is, and they're based on specific criteria. So at the end of the day, if you're trying to meet those criteria, you will eventually end up maybe doing more or less the same thing. And another element is a really fun exercise is going through the vision statements of different universities. And then you might ask it to people in the university, oh, which one is yours? They all look the same. So yeah, maybe do you think rankings plays a role, or is it more maybe history or resources that kind of narrow down this focus?
Rankings have definitely played a role in the past. Remember maybe 15 years ago doing a graduate fair recruitment event, sitting next to our colleagues from the School of Social Work who had at the time had been ranked at least in the top 5, and they proudly displayed that information on the table. And I asked how much that matters, because at the time it really wasn't playing that of a role for the programs I was working with. And my colleague was saying, it matters a lot. Students look at that ranking, they make a list, those are the programs they're applying to, the top 10, without regard for anything about the specializations or any of that. And so definitely has a role, which I think is quite unfortunate, because you then have to assume that the criteria the rankings are using are effective criteria. And I would take issue with that. But there are students who don't consider that at all, perhaps because they think, oh, I'd never get into one of the top 10. And so they're looking for something different. And I think the tide is starting to shift in terms of they're looking for relevance, and they're looking for application, and they're looking for results. Am I going to be able to get a job when I finish this program? I can't take on a lot of debt and then not be able to find a good job.
Yeah. What about the employer perspective? Because you said you also work quite a bit with companies and try to focus on employability. What has been your experience with that? Do you see a change, or does it not really matter where they come from?
So the rankings work, I think, for employers so long as they represent that they're a proxy for what students know and are able to do. That's really what employers are looking for, is students who can step in and do the work they need done, whatever that is, teaching, social work, business, right? So if a school can demonstrate that they can provide whatever that vertical of employers needs through their graduates, the rankings aren't going to matter as much. Part of some of these accreditation processes in the US require you to consult with employers and alumni as you think about making revisions to your programs. And that's really informative when you hear from the employers of your graduates what they think they're good at, what they find the students to be missing, in terms of going back and informing the curriculum. And I think when they find a relationship there with a university that is responsive and linking back into academic freedom, that doesn't mean that they are dictating the curriculum. It does mean that you're taking the knowledge that the faculty would like to generate and building the bridge to the applicability and the relevance. It was really funny. With one of the first programs that we took online when I was at USC was our Master of Arts in Teaching. It was the entry-level teacher preparation program that got students eligible for a credential and to start teaching. And it was a hybrid program. Students are teaching in classrooms, they're filming what they're doing, all of that. But their classwork was being done through modalities like Zoom. And when we talked with some of the big school districts that were hiring our students, what they said was, well, they're really great on pedagogy, but they don't know much about using technology to teach. And I just thought, they're in an online program, but that doesn't mean they know how to use technology to teach. What a complete miss on our part. But that was so important to hear, because that was something that school districts had to be preparing for as they move forward. So we went back and did some revisions to what we were teaching.
Yeah, definitely. Melora, in your article, you also talk about that in the future, universities will go more towards an agile campus. And you talk about shifting these challenges from an either or issue to a both and dialogue. I'd love to explore a bit more. What do you mean by agile campus, and how does this translate to universities and their teaching?
So it's a couple of ways. One is that approach to teaching where you make much better use of the time when students are not in the classroom. And you can do that whether you are teaching in a physical classroom or teaching in a Zoom-based classroom. There's no reason why a ground-based class can't use an LMS with structured activities happening outside of class time. That's one piece. But the larger point is that when we started putting programs online, we constructed them as a parallel universe. We had, in many cases, separate academic advisors and student support systems doing these online programs. Online students didn't have access to a lot of the campus resources because they weren't set up to address time zone differences, never mind just being online, like counseling centers, career centers, right? And instead, I think that the next wave for campuses is to think about being agile, meaning they provide these services regardless of where the students are, regardless of where the faculty are, so that you can offer a class that can be taught on ground or taught online. Students can move back and forth between sections, or if that's too crazy and too difficult to manage, from term to term, they could shift. I'm going to be Let's say I'm enrolled in a campus in California in the US, but for the next term, I'm going to be in Paris. Can I still participate? You could if you go online for that course.
Yeah.
Same thing with all the campus events. If more and more campuses are learning how to live stream and make things much more accessible, but then that just opens the doors to this community in a way that remaining bound by a physical campus prevents you from doing.
Yeah. It's like breaking down barriers and removing borders in a way.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's also much more cost effective if you've got a single support system and a single support staff, as opposed to one group for this students, one group for that students. Early in my experience, I remember getting told by a prospective student that they had called the financial aid office, this is decades ago, to inquire about how does financial aid work if I'm online. And the response was, we don't have an online program. Right. There just was no communication. We didn't have the whole institution on board. And so getting into a single system that can support students no matter where they are is really important for realizing the benefits of what technology can do for a campus.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, for the admissions team, you don't want two different admissions teams because then they feel like they're competing against each other.
So not having this clear distinction between, oh, you're an online student or you're an on-site student, or
Correct.
This is a program, but it's more a blended approach in a way. I'd like to talk a little bit around the role of faculty. Do you see examples where universities work collaboratively on designing a program or delivering a program, or is it mostly still each university creating their own?
It's still mostly each university creating their own. However, I would love to see greater collaboration. And one of the things that we've been dipping a toe in, trying to encourage faculty to think about, is they create textbooks, right? And they don't care if other people use their textbooks. They're getting a royalty from that. They would love other people to adopt their textbook, right? They put a lot of time and energy into that. When you're building an online program and you're creating activities for that asynchronous space, oftentimes, if there's a deep commitment from the university, they're investing a lot of money. We could think about those things as textbooks. And again, here comes academic freedom, intellectual property, right? Universities need to navigate who owns what of that work, which can be a big issue. It's the professor's idea and time, but it's the university's money. And in the sciences, there are all kinds of intellectual property agreements about inventions, right? And you could apply that here so that ahead of time, there are agreements about how royalties would work. But there's no reason why you couldn't think of those as being like textbooks. Mm-hmm. And one of the things we'd love to do is create a marketplace for those, so that, because they are expensive to create, simulations, for example, the original university and faculty member could recoup some of the costs of that by leasing those at a fraction of the cost to other programs. And the other programs then get access to some really great tools without having to invest exorbitant amounts of money.
Yeah.
The first objection that I've heard is, but that's our secret sauce. That's part of what the program is known for. And I would say, like, the textbook is never the secret sauce, right? It's the instruction. It's what you do with it. It's the skill of the instructor.
The experience.
Right. So I would love to persuade institutions and faculty that they're not giving up their secret sauce if they were to share those things, if they were to lease them out. It's actually a way of recouping some of the costs and developing more recognition for the faculty member and the institution in terms of, this is a tremendous resource.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I'm not an IP lawyer. An IP lawyer would probably say, no, that's terrible idea. But yeah, I agree. Maybe not just with the programs that they create, but in general, each university tries to do many things just on their own, whereas there could be a lot of opportunities for co-creation or sharing of resources, infrastructure, and also programs and initiatives that come out.
I will say that it is challenging as soon as you get beyond one person working on the design of a course, it becomes a challenge. I can just think of a course recently that had 5 faculty who wanted to contribute to the build of it. That's 5 different visions, right? If they're not aligned for what this course needs to do. And they were all in the same institution. So as soon as you cross over, you've got to do a lot of pre-work on that collaboration to ensure everybody's on the same page and make it move smoothly. But it is certainly possible to do.
Yeah, maybe going beyond collaboration between universities or academics and talking a bit more about collaboration and partnerships, let's say with industry. One thing we've seen a lot when we do quite a bit of work with universities around partnerships and how do you identify strategic partnerships, for example, the concept of values alignment comes up a lot. But at the same time, the other kind of competing element is money and how much revenue you can get from a potential industry partner. What are your views on that? And maybe going back to the concept of academic freedom, what are some considerations for universities when it comes to these partnerships?
That values piece is really important, but you have to understand from the outset that the companies that you might be working with do have a bottom line. If they're a publicly held company in the US, they have to take care of their investors. So they aren't going to want to engage in something that's going to lose money. And so just knowing that from the outset. But that being said, there are companies in that category that also share values that a university would share in terms of delivering quality education and doing what's best for the students, et cetera. And you want to suss that out before signing up with a group and doing reference checking about what was it like to work with this partner. But I think there are many opportunities out there that get missed.
Yeah, great. Maybe just a couple more elements to talk about. I was reading through your article and I did extract a little part that maybe summarizes a lot of what we've been talking about. In the future, successful institutions will have inverted this commoditization game through restructured curricula, partnerships, collaboration across the higher education system, advocacy on behalf of students, and create different ways for students to attend regardless of need. They won't sell their souls, but they will, through creative and perhaps even challenging collaboration, emerge as a community and with a stronger sense of identity. I think that's very inspiring. And we've talked quite a bit also about the different challenges and how to overcome them. But I'd like to maybe just revisit this issue of creating a sense of identity for an institution. Any advice or experience you've had around how can universities really focus on moving away from just becoming a generic university that does the same as the other 50 in the country, but instead really create this uniqueness and differentiate themselves as institutions?
It has to start with the leadership of whatever the unit is, whether it's a school or a program or a university, and having conversations broadly about how you create that sense of identity, conversations about what matters to us, what is the vision, where do we want to go, and there are actually structured, facilitated ways you can have those conversations. One of them is called a future search, where you bring representatives from all the stakeholders into the room. And it's a 3-day process looking at the past, the present, the future. What can we all agree on going forward as our values, as the place where we're heading? Whatever the process is, creating space to have those kinds of conversations is really important. And this takes me to one other point that I think we haven't touched on much, which is these are change management processes, and they are hard. They take time. And you need to involve the faculty. And too often, I think we're pressed for time. Involving the faculty can be contentious. It can be really challenging and just time consuming. And so it can get skipped over. And I just think that's a huge strategic mistake. Figuring out whatever you're going to be doing as we move forward with universities, create the space to have these conversations and involve the faculty. It doesn't have to be all faculty, but you need a faculty voice in there for sure. Just as I would advocate, you need a student voice. Establish clear expectations for what that involvement will mean, and then following through so that you become reliable, dependable, trustworthy. Because the consequences for not consulting the faculty are enormous in that they haven't been brought along. They may be rightfully resistant to these changes, and you just can't make any of these changes without their support and participation. So that would be my final advice, is to recognize these as change management efforts, and therefore they need your time and attention.
I think that's very valuable, and also bringing this top down and bottom up, because otherwise what sometimes happens as well is the leadership changes, you get a new leader coming in with a different vision. And then if the university itself hasn't established this sense of identity or this cohesive vision, it's really hard to always adjust and change. And I think people get fatigue or they no longer trust in the system. But what you said around getting their inputs and involving them is definitely part of the change management.
And you wonder why the innovation is failing. There's no follow through. So the next time you try, people are just going to go, I'll just wait this one out because it's going to come too.
Yeah, exactly. Melora, this has been a very enjoyable discussion. I think we've touched on a lot of different elements, some challenges, but I also think some good inspiration for how to deal with some of these challenges and some really great insights. Maybe before we wrap up, any final reflections or words of wisdom from you?
I think that change is natural, and keeping the status quo is also a natural reaction. But universities, I think, are going to need to adapt. The presence of technology is just changing the way everything can happen. You'd have to be a very high profile institution to sit on your laurels and survive.
Mm-hmm.
And we need the diversity of institutions out there. We need them all represented, size, type, location. And so I'm suggesting all of these things with the intention of encouraging universities and colleges to thrive.
Definitely. Perfect end note for that.
Thank you.
Melora, thank you so much for your time, and I wish you a wonderful day ahead of you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to today's discussion. Follow UIIN on LinkedIn, and if you're enjoying our podcasts, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review in your podcast platform of choice to help other people find this content too.